Hi, I'm Jeff Sutherland, inventor and co-creator of Scrum and Scrum at Scale. It's a privilege to be at Scrum Interaction 2022 to talk to you about recent events in Scrum and future directions. As Elon Musk said, I think speed is the fundamental determinant of the competitiveness of any company, especially when technology is involved. The rate of innovation fundamentally determines which companies succeed. Scrum has been designed for innovation and speed, and so it's uniquely suitable to today's companies. If you look at the stock prices on the bottom of this page, we have the three largest companies in the world: Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. I've worked directly with Amazon management and teams and Microsoft management and teams implementing Scrum. Virtually all product development is done with Scrum in these companies. And I've had Apple employees in my Scrum training, and they tell me that Apple meets all its dates by doing Scrum by the book. The book Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time. So the best companies in the world are driven by Scrum. And in COVID, they all did really well. At the top of the page, we have a Japanese company, Toyota, John Deere, one of the largest agricultural equipment companies in the world, and Tesla. And you can see Toyota did go up a little bit during COVID, but John Deere went up their stock price increased by about 400%. We're going to talk about why. And of course, Tesla stock price is astronomically increased. And Tesla is a very agile company and will continue to increase in the future. The reason is that they deliver 20 hardware software innovations to the assembly line every week. That's 1,000 times faster than traditional automobile vendors. And it's created a market capitalization for Tesla that's 400% bigger than Toyota. John Deere delivers 15 times as much farm machinery with 10 times as many innovative supply chain management features as they did before Scrum at Scale was implemented. Their stock price during COVID went up almost 400%, more than Amazon. And Rocket Mortgage, another one of the leading companies in the United States in the financial sector. We worked with their marketing leadership, who became agile trainers for the organization. They increased the production rate for new features on mortgage lending by 800%. And in 2021, they tripled their revenue and profitability went up 900%. So these Scrum companies or Scrum driven, Toyota is not so much Scrum, although we're training in the United States, in Europe, and in Japan. But John Deere and Rocket Mortgage are driven by Scrum, are reaping bigger benefits. Now, all agile transformations do not succeed. Most companies in the world today are introducing some kind of agile transformation. And recent surveys show that 53% of them fail to meet expectations of management. And of those 53%, 67% go bankrupt or out of business. And we've worked with some of those failures, rescuing them with Scrum at Scale. So we're intimately familiar with the problems that cause these agile transformations to fail. And Scrum at Scale specifically has been designed to increase the probability of success and avoid these failures. This all started back in 2016 when Akihiro Fuji from KDDI visited me in Boston. And he said, Jeff, the training on Scrum that's going on in Japan is not adequate. It's not working. We need the true Scrum, the Scrum of Takeuchi Nonaka in Japan. The Scrum that's talked about in their paper, The New Product Development Game. And we want a joint venture with Scrum Inc. In the United States, a Scrum Inc. Japan that will do the proper training for Japanese companies. And we want to bring the true Scrum to Toyota in particular. So over the years, we evolved Scrum Inc. Japan joint venture. While we were doing that, we were actually training and coaching in the United States at Toyota. We prioritized every initiative in Toyota America, particularly in the IT software development area. And we picked one of the top initiatives for the first implementation of Scrum at scale. And that initiative was a software development project that had been going on for over 5 years, 200 people, had not delivered anything for their most important software system that was installed in all dealers in the United States to report on the commissions that they were to be paid by Toyota for selling cars. After doing an investigation, a Scrum at Scale analysis, we cut that team to 20 people with a really strong product owner. And in 6 months, we delivered that product. And the Toyota management said, Scrum is not just Kaizen, continuous improvement. Scrum is Kaikaku, it's revolution. It takes things to a completely new level. So I'm going to talk to you about how and why this is possible. Why does Scrum at Scale work so well? First of all, it implements the true Scrum, the Scrum that's designed to deliver twice the value at half the cost. It's an operating system for the entire organization. It prioritizes interventions. So it goes after the things in a company that need to be improved quickly and for the least amount of work achieves the maximum amount of enterprise impact. It does this by implementing a minimum viable bureaucracy to enable linear scalability. And this solves the problem that when you add teams, the productivity per team slows down. Just like when you add people to a team, the productivity per person slows down. To overcome that problem, we have to carefully implement the organizational structure according to patterns in the Scrum book, The Spirit of the Game. There are 6 patterns that need to be implemented to make Scrum at Scale work, and no more. So what is the true Scrum? What did we agree with Fuji-san? We agreed that, first of all, the Scrum Guide, the 3 roles, the 5 events, and the 3 artifacts in Scrum are critical. That self-managing teams are the core of good Scrum, and having a Scrum Master, a leader who serves, is the beginning of the true Scrum. But Scrum is based on the 1986 Takeuchi Nanaka paper, the New Product Development Game, which was a paper about lean teams and lean companies. And so the best tools for improvement, continuous improvement in Scrum can be found in the lean literature. And particularly, our Scrum Masters need to know how to implement the Toyota A3 process, a value stream management, understand process efficiency and how to improve it. Third, there are patterns in the Scrum book that enable hyper-productive teams. And in fact, without these patterns, it is impossible to get twice the work in half the time. So in all our courses, we teach the high-performing patterns. And finally, Scrum at Scale, designed to deliver twice the work in half the time with hundreds of thousands of teams, uses 6 patterns in the book to implement Scrum at Scale. So I want to talk about them a little bit. What are the patterns that implement the minimum viable bureaucracy that allow us to get an 800% improvement in performance achieved at Rocket Mortgage, the largest mortgage company in the United States. Well, it took a decade of meetings by Scrum experts to create the Scrum Patterns book. And throughout this 10 years of work, our product owner, Jim Coplian, repeatedly asserted there are no scaling patterns. We're not going to create any special patterns for scaling because Scrum is fractal in nature. The way it works in the large is the same as the way it works in the small. And if you add any extra overhead to Scrum, it will slow it down. So Scrum at Scale was created with no scaling patterns that would cripple performance. It starts with the self-managing teams in Scrum, and sometimes it's hard for traditional managers to understand why we need self-management teams. This is because creative or systems theory shows clearly, and there are mathematical proofs of this in published research papers, that if you increase the degrees of freedom of a system up until the edge of where it would go off into chaos, just before the edge of chaos, that system will evolve quicker. So removing controls from a team speeds up the evolution of continuous improvement, which is the goal of Scrum. And over the last 20 to 25 years, we've used this chart on the right that projects occur in different domains. Very simple projects, you could use traditional project management. Simple means not very much change, less than 4% variability. In things that are more complicated but well understood, you could use lean. And we see that used a lot. But for anything having to do with technology, particularly software creation, there's a lot of experimentation and change. In fact, the requirements in a software project, typically 50% of those requirements will change during implementation of the software. And that is in a domain of complexity, where you don't understand what you're going to need to do until it's done. And in that area of complexity, self-managing teams provide the maximum innovation and the maximum speed. We saw this when we were creating Scrum just before the first Scrum team was formed. I helped start up a company called iRobot. I gave them space inside my company, and this robot, Genghis Khan was the name of it, would come out of their lab into my office every other day. It would try to hunt me down. It had infrared heat-seeking sensors. And I talked to the professor at MIT, the senior professor that was the co-founder of the company. He would come by for happy hour on Fridays, and I would say, Professor Brooks, explain to me how this robot works. And he would say, you know, for 30 years we tried to create a robot with a huge database and a program with millions of lines of code, and nothing worked. So what we've discovered is that robot systems, to be autonomous, need to be self-learning systems. And the best database is no database, only real-world sensors, real-time data immediately as the robot starts to function. And the best program is no program. As we found with Tesla and self-driving, it's all based on neural networks. The system figures out what to do as it proceeds. And he showed me how this robot worked. He showed me the neural network chip in the head that was blank. He plugged it into the robot. There's a switch on the bottom of the robot that turns it on. And as soon as you turn it on, it starts rolling around and its legs will start flailing. And within 30 seconds, it will be on its feet. And as it starts to move, it looks like a baby learning how to walk for the first time. But within a few minutes, it's running around the room. So I said to Professor Brooks, do you think we could apply these same principles to a development team and boot up a super smart development team in a very short period of time? And Professor Brooks said, I don't know. Why don't you try it? And so I did. It's called Scrum. So much of what we learned in autonomous robots is built into Scrum, and self-management is the core of that. Self-organization is a concept from complex adaptive systems theory. An intelligent system self-organizes to achieve a goal. When it bangs into an impediment or bangs into a wall, it works around that impediment and struggles to achieve the goal by trying something different. So teams in Scrum are self-managing to achieve a sprint goal. This is what we call self-organization. Scrum teams need a Scrum Master, and today we're calling a Scrum Master a leader who serves. And one of the best books about servant leadership is the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. The great CEOs of companies that improve the stock price by thousands of times were servant leaders. And they described their job as getting the right people on the bus, providing them with a vision, and the people on the bus figure out how to achieve that vision. But what we found in Scrum teams is very often the Scrum Masters have the wrong person on the bus. And a leader who serves makes sure the wrong person gets off the bus. So to do this job requires a leader who serves. Now that leader who serves, as a team starts to grow in number, when it gets up to about 7 people, it will start to slow down, and the leader who serves will notice that and start to implement a pattern called mitosis. It's similar to the splitting of a cell. We're going to split that team of 7 into 2 teams by the time it gets to 8. And now we need to coordinate those 2 teams so that they can work together towards a common goal. And the pattern in the Scrum book for how to do that coordination is called Scrum of Scrums. When you have multiple teams working on a single product development, you have to get them focused together. Otherwise, they work on their own things and they lose common sight of a goal. So the pattern Scrum of Scrum is described in the book, and it has many associated patterns that enable it to work. And what we found, this was back in the early mid-90s at IDX Systems, where we had hundreds of teams. We found out how to coordinate teams through multiple patterns that support this Scrum of Scrums, like a daily Scrum of Scrums events where people from multiple teams come together and decide what needs to be done to deliver a shippable product at the end of every sprint all together, or more often. Many companies deliver every day. Amazon delivers more than once a second. This pattern is the core of getting high performance at scale. Now, once you have multiple teams, then you have the problem of a single product owner driving multiple teams needs help. And so we want product owners of each team working with the chief product owner to deliver a single product all together. and upgrade that every sprint or more often. So product owner team is a pattern. And one of the things we found at the enterprise level is that unless the leadership is aligned with the product owner team, the agile transformation would fail. So we bring together the leadership and the product owner team on a regular cadence, at least every sprint, in what we call a meta scrum. It's a forum where the entire enterprise can align behind the product owner's backlog. Finally, the last pattern is simply the Scrum team at the executive level. We need executive leadership meeting as a Scrum team to drive the agile part of the organization. And this team is responsible for continuous improvement of the organization. It has a product owner, it has a Scrum master, and this is what drives agility at the enterprise level. So Scrum at Scale has only 6 patterns: mitosis, the Scrum team, the Scrum of Scrums, product owner, the meta Scrum, the executive action team. This creates the minimum viable bureaucracy and enables the performance that we get in places like Rocket Mortgage. Rocket Mortgage was using a scaled agile framework. They started with 26 release trains, each with many teams, 17,000 people in the organization. By 2021, 22,000 team members, 41 release trains. The good news is that they had a successful agile transformation with the scaled agile framework. They actually cut delivery time in half. But the team building the front end of the system, called the brand marketing release train, found that that was not fast enough. Customers were demanding faster performance, faster upgrades, more features. So the senior technical management came to my training, where I trained trainers on how to implement Scrum at Scale organization. And they went back and they cut the average cycle time from 86 days down to 11.6 days, 720% better. Now, the way they did that is, number one, implementing the true Scrum. They had to cut 15 specialization job description on the development team down to 3. They had to get product owners and Scrum masters who could perform in those roles. They needed to streamline the organizations and meetings and change them so the meetings only focused on delivery. And with a strong DevOps orientation, they went from delivering every quarter to delivering multiple times a day. They got so good at this that when COVID testing was needed for the city of Detroit, where their headquarters is, they took a couple of teams and in 2.5 day sprints, they brought up the COVID testing system for Detroit. This model, Scrum at Scale model, has worked so well for the brand marketing release train. It's now being rolled across the entire organization, across all the release trains. Now, we've written a paper in the Harvard Business Review with Professor Takeuchi, who will be talking later, called Embracing Agile, and then a second paper called Agile at Scale. So we have 2 papers that follow on at the Harvard Business Review, follow on to Takeuchi and Nonaka's paper, The New Product Development Game. And in those papers, we describe clearly, from a management perspective, what is needed for Scrum. getting the right teams organized in the right way. And the Rocket Mortgage example I just described showed how they took one of the best agile transformations and improved it 400% with Scrum at Scale by reducing the roles, by reducing the meetings, by shortening the delivery time. And in 2021, revenue tripled, profitability was up 900%. Now, to do this at Rocket Mortgage, we actually trained the managers who became leaders who serve. And there are very few papers in the literature on managers as leaders. One of them is a virtual reality company that we published some years ago. And the managers found the biggest challenge was letting go. Let the teams self-organize. Stop micromanaging. But when they did, they reported 73% increase in productivity, 58% increase in quality, 84% better changes in direction. And the role of the manager changed from telling people what to do into communicating goals and visions. A key insight of Professors Takeuchi and Nanaka. And they increased the responsibility of the team, and that affected the hiring practices of the managers. They hired different kinds of people, both for management and development teams. And their most common comment, my job changes from a manager to a leader. So how does a manager become a leader? Well, my background is in the military. I spent 4 years at the United States Military Academy, West Point, then 11 years as a fighter pilot. And I learned to be an agile leader, particularly in aerial warfare. And the first principle that a leader needs to implement is when you start an agile transformation, about a third of the company will not want to do it. Another third of the company will go along with the management. The last third of the company will be interested in improving. So, in order to overcome the resistance, which is needed to be successful, you need the mind of Sun Tzu, the strategic mind that enables winning the fight to do what's right without having to fire people. That's an agile leader. Second, as soon as you start to implement, we learn from the greatest swordsman in the world, Miyamoto Musashi, that every movement close in needs to be targeted to achieve the far out goals. Musashi fought the way of two swords, a short sword and a long sword. And what he said is, close in combat with a short sword, you had to be able, if people came at you on horseback, to have a long sword to fend them off. And the key was the movements with the short sword had to be the same as the movement of the long sword, or you would get confused and get killed. So this ability to execute in short sprints in a way that achieves the long-term goals is what Musashi taught and is in the mind, embedded in the mind of an agile leader. Third, probably the most well-known book on war, General von Clausewitz. It's a book on cutting through the fog of war. When you engage in conflict, and any product development effort is an engagement in conflict, you're fighting against problems, You're dealing with people issues. You're fighting with the competition. And when things go wrong, people tend to blame someone else. And sometimes you lose key people. People quit. They're fired. Confusion is rampant. Rumors circulate. Motivation declines. And the ability of an agile leader to cut through that confusion to achieve the goal is the power of agility. And finally, we have the greatest strategic leader in the military in recent decades, Colonel John Boyd, who taught all the military services in the War College the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, situational awareness, rapid iterative response to opposing forces. Professor Nanaka is writing a book on the U.S. Marines that has totally adopted John Boyd's strategy. And he says to me, Jeff, Toyota was built on the plan, do, check, act cycle, the basis of lean. But today, they're not going to be successful unless they're able to implement the OODA loop of John Boyd: observe, orient, decide, act. And so these fundamental principles taught by these leaders are universal, and they need to be in the mind and in the ability to execute of every agile leader. I'm going to show you a short video that gives you the idea of what I'm talking about.
Kung Fu. The Shaolin Temple became world famous as the home of Kung Fu after being discovered by Hollywood 50 years ago. 400 monks live and study here. 100 of those are warrior monks. For these student monks, Kung Fu is not just a martial art, it's a spiritual practice. In 2 days, Xu Yangdian will face a test to qualify as a full warrior monk.
功夫少林功夫跟其他武术的不一样的区别在于，它是一个佛教圣地，有信仰的地方。
Mastering Kung Fu to the level expected at the Shaolin Temple takes years of dedication.
如果这次没有通过，还是非常对自己的一种失望。在这你说明这前期这十多年来，你这一切都是努力是白费的。
Yandian will have to prove himself before a panel of senior monks in both Kung Fu and Buddhist teachings. Senior monk Yang Sen is Yandian's mentor.
这个不用冲力，这个不用，这个是打完，这个是压手，直接回来了。
It's thought Kung Fu was developed by the early Chinese monks as a way to stay fit enough for hours of seated meditation. In the past, Shaolin warrior monks used their skills to protect their monasteries and villages. But today, its perfection is a mark of faith. Each monk chooses a specialism.
当时我就对这个特别的喜欢，加上这个后宫的高技巧动作啊，那对非常的渴望的希望能学会。
Yandian has been practicing with the monkey stick for 11 years. But there's one move he struggles with. Monkey going up the tree. One of the most difficult in all Kung Fu.
你的力量是否足，就决定你的速度在那一刹那间那个爆发力是最终达到那个点上，蹦就出来了。身体的急速感觉是最快的达到。
Yundian must place both feet on the stick, let go with his hands, and catch the stick before it hits the ground.
你现在这个动作做不好，最大的原因是心。一定要把心静下来去做这个动作，专注于当下。
Strength, balance, and total concentration are essential.
我相信你能做得到，明白吗？加油！
So to the agile leader, to achieve agile execution, your speed decides your power. You must remove impediments quickly. And to do that, you must strike at the right moment to release that power. Holding on to ineffective ways of doing things will block delivery. There is a right way to do this, the Scrum way, but it requires practice, practice, practice. And as the senior monk says, you will do it. Come on, you will change your world, you will change your company, you will change yourself for the better. So to conclude these comments, I want to point out one of the oldest companies in the world, a manufacturing company of agile agricultural equipment, tractors. Scrum at scale analysis specified the initial target as supply chain management. The velocity of supply chain improvements increased 1,000%. Production increased 1,500%. This all happened during COVID. The stock price went up 400%. This is what we call delivering business value. And when this happened, the agile leaders of John Deere got the highest award in the company from the board of directors, who said this has created the best business performance of the company in over 100 years. So I encourage you to read our latest case study. It's over 40 pages where we go through all the details of what happened not only in the supply chain, which got the biggest improvement in performance, but overall for the whole company, output was up substantially, time to market reduced, employees having a better work experience, return on investment better than 100%, and an empowering culture where agility is part of the DNA and agile leadership can effectively execute agile practice. Thanks for having me today. I wish you great success in Scrum Connections, and I particularly will be excited to hear Professor Takeuchi talk about some of the origins of Scrum. Thank you very much.